All right. So, as per requests I've gotten from the forums and a few other people, this is a quick, maybe not so quick, look at how do I set up an empire in the Starfire Empire management spreadsheet. Because this is a gigantic thing and it's got a lot of buttons and a lot of levers, and it makes no sense when you look at it really, just from scratch. So, we're going to do a little bit of a walkthrough on setting up an empire in here, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the various tabs do, what flows into what other things, and we're going to see if we can't get something at least set up and running. Um, Now, the one thing that's worth commenting on this spreadsheet is that it's kind of like that old quote from Nobunaga Morgan from what is it? From Sid Meier's Alpha Centauri, where you know there is no possible evolution to a new economic system because no economic system exists. Everything has to be fully formed and operational right off the bat, otherwise everything will crash as soon as you try to make use of it. The good news is that with Starfire, unlike real life, it's a turn-based game, so we can spend our time plugging all the data in before we start the new turn, and then we can see everything works, or not, as the case may be. So we're taking a look at this right now. We've got the info page, which is the opening splash screen. It's got, a bunch of legalese. It's got, my original writing from way back in the day, a bunch of credits, a list of new things and things need to be done that I'm pretty sure this is all horrifyingly out of date. But I haven't touched this thing in years, and I really owe Steven/Lum a real big thumbs up for taking this thing from a functional tool, but one that definitely needed some time in the rock tumbler to get it going. So with that all being said, let's dive into this. I'm going to be ignoring these tabs in a bunch of orders because we don't need everything right away. And we'll look first at getting everything set up, and then we'll pivot back and take a look at the various tabs as they go. So this is a brand new empire. This is a completely brand new sheet. Now I'm going to be cooking things up as we go, and so I've got a convenient little set of dice next to me to crank out a couple numbers as necessary. So first things first, when we've got our brand new empire that we're building, is let's give them a name. Now, I asked on the Discord for a couple, and one that kind of stuck me with is, of course, with any sort of testing, what was it? Let's go with just the Kerbal Empire. I mean, if something explodes, thanks. We just blame Jeb. Now, turn order 1, this is useful because that is an easy, quick glance as to what turn is where. Empire EL, this is used later. It's pulled from here, actually, and then it goes down to the R&D tab for a bunch of other things. We'll look at that in a little bit. We can ignore most of this here, because this is a lot of different modifications on if you have a special custom empire. It doesn't really matter. The two things that matter for us are racial statistics for militancy, determination, chauvinism. This is useful for tracking because this will matter, especially if you're running a non-player empire. Like if this is your own, these are essentially window dressing, and these are the defaults ones for a player empire. If they're a non-player empire, these will obviously be different. The first thing we actually care about entering on here is actually the primary race name and then the populational data here. So primary race name, the Kerbals, of course. We're going to have them on a T world, standard Terran world. Habitable world index this is the it's modal 1 to 10, so 1 to 10 is as normal, and then 10 is considered right next to 1. It's like a clock, except base 10 instead of base 12. And Kerbal habitability range, we will retain at 2 because it's the standard one. What that means is that if they're perfect, let's say is 5, their habitability index is preferably 5, then they will find anything 3, 4, 5, 6, or 7 to be perfectly habitable. So that's all we need to do set up for our Kerbals here. Later on, if you have an empire that has multiple races, you've got multiple slots. Take a quick glance down here. All the stuff farther down here, everything on spending priorities, this is government type, all this other empire construction policies, exploration and diplomatic, space ownership. This is all entirely fluff, and it's only useful if you're running a non-player an NPC. So we'll ignore those entirely. The next thing we're going to go down, we're going to skip income. Actually, no. Let's look at income summary. Industrial unit purchases, factories. Lease revenue will orbit back because we're going to pretend we started with a couple of ships to lease. Scrapping, trade, income, all the rest. This covers sort of random income from various places. We're not going to look at this right now. The thing we are going to care about, though, is here in the planets tab. This is the first one. So system ID, we're going to assume that, let's say the Kerbals are coming from system 250. Now, system ID number, all of these numbers here, basically running all the way from random event all the way to the left here, are all just entered text with a few of them being drop downs. Like in this case, class for whatever kind of planet it is, habitability index, build size, governor. This is just a typed field, but this does reference off of elsewhere, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. And REI resource index is standard dropdown. So for this here, what we do need to have is, and we'll stick to this for now, more imperialist music. We will stick with the system ID of 250. We'll stick with the basic home name, system name, which we do need to have. We need to have the planet name. The system names and the planet names should ideally be unique. If you have two system names that are the same, like you have, like let's say a star system that is Alpha, and then you have another that is, let's say, system ID 500, and then let's say you have another one that's 100 and you also call it Alpha, certain parts of the script will think that these are part of the same system. Similarly, if you have a planet name that's unique, my general suggestion is if you've got a planet that you're naming that you really don't care about, that is just some moonlet that you're throwing a bunch of population on, call it part of the home system, and then let's call it like 2-tech B. So this would be like planet 2, like, you know, second planet B, the second moon. Now, what we need now, the first thing we need to change off of this guy here is race. This pulls off of the drop down that we plugged in at the Empire overview. So now we can see rather than having home Empire race, we have Kerbals. And so that's the dudes that we need to put in here. So that will automatically populate out your income based on population, industrial units, class, habitability index. You'll see that this planet actually is overpopulated because it's a habitability index of 1. Our Kerbals actually have a preference of 5, so let's fix that. 5, there we go. Now you can see that monthly population has changed. We can look at it again. 1, it's overpopulated, its habitability of harsh, and it has a max population of only 1900. We're starting with 2000, so you know, we want to have our Kerbals give a chance to grow. And so you can see here also there is a list here of imperial races that we have in our empire, and Kerbals are the only guys. This list basically goes down for a while, down to 70 rows, but you can cut and expand and shove more of these as your empire grows. The spreadsheet math that's designed on here is designed to look at the entire chunk. So if you insert like an extra 40 or 50 lines in here, nothing will explode. Shouldn't. Systems. Star system management. This is one that we just need to make sure we've got. Well, let's actually change this from home system name to Kerbal, because that's the name of the star. Kerbal, Kerbals. Let's call it Kerbin. And what is it? Kerbin. Elo. That's not actually Elo. I know that. And let's say Minmus, just for the heck of it. So what the systems tab here is, it looks for everything that is labeled in the home system and then populates this information out here. This is used for a couple of things later down the road, but this is primarily a sort of an internal reference, lets you see what your probability of everything is going. So now there is no home system, obviously, but if we go type in Kerbal, if I can spell it right, there we go. Now it's populating all the information. Great. Construction tab, this is where we build everything. There's two sections here that's basically worth noting. One is the left-hand side here, which is used for orbital shipyards of various flavors, and then the right-hand one here, which is used for planetary stuff. You notice this one's throwing a bunch of errors because it says it can't find the planet named Homeworld. So if we plug in Kerbin instead, now all of a sudden it's now filling all the data. We don't need to do anything really here. We will. This is more useful to start plugging in when you start building stuff, but we're going to assume that we start off with our standard 10 shipyards, and ship design and your starbase construction is a matter of another discussion. Shipping, we're going to ignore entirely because we don't do anything in shipping. R&D, this is the next thing that deals with a bunch of different things that we'll look at later. We start off with a bunch of research stations, which are conveniently already entered, and a bunch of science academies, which are entered, and a bunch of science academies down here for breakthroughs. We don't need to actually input anything in here for startup. Tech tab, this is a giant list of all the techs that exist in the game for everything. As a sort of a quick shorthand, so rather than you cracking open the rulebook and trying to figure out, okay, where's the next knot, how far have I researched everything, it's instead sort of as a quick and dirty thing, it's available here. We don't need to do anything here right off the bat, but well, actually we do, because we do need to go and plug in to say that we've researched certain things. So we're going to assume that our Kerbals have gone the one true way and made the standard I engine. So we're going to say, in here in this items research, we're going to say they have IAs, which they've done, and what we're going to do is we're going to go and simply highlight these two cells, and we're going to say they're green because now we've researched and we prototyped them. And then we will delete all the text entries that are in there because that says we've researched and done them, we don't have to deal with them. As part of our Kerbal gloriness, we will also have gotten ICAs, so basically the basic commercial engines. We'll plug that in. We will engine root is based off of our economic level, so they will say we get that at 2 for free. So charged particle engine, I mean, if you want to use a charged particle engine, you can make a note of that. And then we have the inertialist engine, which is the standard I engines. Small craft, we do have. In this case, like if we've got a lot of stuff, I might just leave the green in and just copy stuff in. But you get the idea. This is more of a record keeping thing as we go through it. We'll say like we have, just to continue for a few more, we'll say we have basic armor. We don't have anything for automated platforms. Good for us. We do have construction, which will be up to EL2. And and so on and so on. We'll say what kind of energy weapons or what kind of missile weapons we have, and if we've got shields, which are here, S, survey instruments, which we'll probably need because we'll want to find warp points to get out of the system, sensors, and that sort of stuff. The other thing that's worth mentioning on here that you'll notice that while this part scrolls up here, this upper part doesn't, is that this grid up here is useful for you to track what have you actually prototyped and available for construction. So, for example, since we're starting off with constructions for ships, we know we have up to light cruisers, fast destroyers, but we haven't prototyped them. In the basic game, when you're starting off at EL2, it's assumed that you have everything up to destroyers prototyped. So you'll notice that a couple of these things here are given little bolds. That's assuming to be your starting text. So let's say our starter, that's driving over to there, the formatting. Our standard hulls here have been prototyped. That means also that our standard freighter hull's been prototyped. And because the game is kind to us, it also assumes that we've prototyped the fast versions of the smaller hulls up to the frigate. We've also prototyped the bases up to BS2 size. The rest of everything else, basic, enhanced, improved, noted these hulls, we don't have any research on, and we haven't researched or prototyped any mobile bases, so those will be left. The last two that's worth mentioning are these two guys over here. We start with these. We have the ability to build asteroid forts and the ability to build orbital space stations. That's it for there. So this is a nice little way for taking a glance at what do I have available for me. Facilities tab. This was something that was a work in progress when I first started on this. There is nothing that's in here that references elsewhere, so you can, if you want, completely ignore this tab. It is useful because it gives you a place to write down where you have like pilot training facilities, where you have research facilities, and so on. But this is an entirely just a reference tab. It doesn't feed into anything. Now, ship designs, on the other hand, it does. And now this will start us with a couple of basics. It'll give us a gigs and shuttles, which are standard small craft that everyone starts with. It gives us a very basic shipyard, which is the standard 10 shipyards, one cargo hold, and one life support QA. A very bare bones shipyard, but it'll do exactly what you need. And then it also gives us asteroid or assault shuttles, which are another early small craft. It doesn't have anything else though. So there are a few things that we want to put in. This is actually a useful tab to reference early designs you might build. So let's go and plug in 3 designs we're going to want. We're going to have, let's say, the Jeb, and we're going to call this a freighter. It is going to be, let's say, an FT a freighter 2. It's going to cost, I don't know, let's say 250. You'll actually have a real design that'll have this worked out. And it has a maintenance of let's say, of 5%. I think that's what it is for freighters. We're going to have a Valentina, which is going to be the same thing. This one's going to be more expensive. Let's say it's going to be 320, and we'll see why it is in a moment. And then let's give us... What's a good name for a really questionable survey boat from them? The Poodle. Because that engine needs some respect. And we're going to call this an EX, or it's an Explorer type hull. It's going to cost, let's say, I don't know, 400. And that's going to be military, so it's going to be a 15% maintenance. Now, these are all, quite literally, numbers I've just pulled out of thin air. They have absolutely no relation to an actual ship design that exists, and any design you actually build will undoubtedly have far less round costs, and the maintenance cost will be such. The part we care about, though, is this next section of the grid, where we have here for capacity. So the Jeb, let's say, is going to have 10 cargo holds of cargo capacity, and I'll show why this is relevant in a moment. The Valentina, on the other hand, will have 10 QV capacity, as it's our population carrier. The Poodle, on the other hand, will have nothing, because it's our survey boat. Nothing has luxury quarters. Strategic speed. All of these, we will say, were designed with strategic speed 4, because we were thinking ahead. The next ones here are a little bit of references that will eventually tie into other things one day, but are primarily there for reference. MSP is how many magazines capacity does this thing have? All these ships have nothing. How many boat mate capacity does it have? Also nothing. Warp point survey speed. Our Poodle will have this because we'll assume it has XA, the cheapest survey speed. Planetary survey point. It'll also have 3. Maximum survey speed for this guy will be 3. What is this? Warp point survey points. That's actually per movement point. Sorry, so that should be 1. I don't have the rules in front of me open for me for this, right? We'll just make assumptions. And then damage points or hits to kill. For this guy, this doesn't matter either. It's also just a nice reference. And the reason why this is also a nice reference later on is that you might want to completely open your ship design text file to go and pull open all of your designs when you're going, I need more of my, let's go. Let's throw, let's say, warship. Like this type thing doesn't actually feed anything. You can use whatever nomenclature you choose. Our mainsail destroyer. Let's say it costs 600. It's really expensive. 15. Strategic speed of 2. And let's say this guy has 20 hit points. Just as an example. And if, let's say, you're knowing, I need to build more mainsails, but you don't want to dig through your entire Word doc, you can just take a quick glance here and say, oh, that's where my mainsails are. Now, the other reason why maintenance cost matters is because it'll actually be pulling data from the class as well as the maintenance cost for our ships tab, which we'll be going to in just a moment, which is our ships tab. Now, this is not generally for orders or for organization, although it's somewhat useful for that. This is for actually tracking how much we're actually spending on maintenance, what its grade is, and so on. So let us go and say we had... Now, what I like to do is for stuff that I've loaned out to the commercial freighter network, in this case both our Jeb and our Valentina. Well, that's the fleet name, sorry. Jeb and our Valentina. Now you can see that it's automatically pulled out the base maintenance cost for each one of them. Now, total maintenance cost for these is 0 because we don't have any. Let's say we have 10 of each. Now we'll put both of these, we'll say this is our CFN fleet. Now the reason why I put CFN in fixed units as opposed to under mobile units is that mobile units will eventually need to get assigned to a fleet for it to properly calculate all the maintenance and to manage it. The CFN is essentially just amorphous. It's everywhere in your empire all at once. And just shoving it here in fixed units will help keep your fleet orders tidier, but it'll still cost you for your maintenance, and you can shuffle things in and out as necessary. For our CFN fleet, we don't want to bother putting a location because they're everywhere. Notes tab is entirely blank, and it does what it says. Now, let's say we do have some defenses though, and that is we're going to say our fleet 1. Let's just call it that 1. It has a mainsail. Now, you'll notice though that unlike in the fixed units, here it's now saying it has a maintenance cost. It's always going to assume that if you have a line entry in here of that ship class, there's at least one of them. So we can see, I can't spell. The mainsail is the first one, but let's say we have 2. There's 2 ways we can do it. We can either have 2 entries, which is the mainsail, and then we can say have this one being the putt-putt. Or if this is something that is more generic, like let's say we had gunboats, and we don't really care what we call gunboat Squadron 5 as to what we call gunboat Squadron 6. They're a replacement for us. We could instead say 2 of them. So in this case, we're no longer caring that we have 2 mainsails, or they're called both the mainsail. For what else, it doesn't matter. Let's say you're a hive mind. You don't care what you call your ships at all. Then in this case, we have 2 of mainsails that are in this one line entry. We can see that the mainsail has strategic speed 2, and this is where we'll note down base grade. So we'll say base grade, even base grade, because they've been in service. Fleet 1, fleet orders. Now, here we've got the home infrastructure, which is where that's our space stations put in. But now, we have Fleet 1. We want to go and make, it doesn't have a commanding officer. We're going to leave that blank. That pulls from the leaders tab, which we'll take a look in a second. But we do need to say what the fleet status is. Now, it's kind of hard to squint, but we've got a couple of options down here. We've got normal, assumes we are just floating around in normal. We have system defense, which is part of the rule set that allows us to discount a lot of our fleet maintenance because it's sitting in a specific position, and basically local star system is paying for its defense. And that's one of the things where the systems thing matter, because the systems matter is you'll notice there's a system defense column. This is an additional amount of maintenance that the system is willing to pay if you've got the ships basically parked in that star system, ships or bases or whatever, parked there and defending, and that's what they'll be willing to pay. And the SDF refund here is how much are they actually paying out. You should never be paying more refund than what you'll actually have for defenses, for pretty obvious reasons. Normally in a real computer program, this would be calculated more cleanly, where basically we're paying it out of our left hand and we're getting reimbursed out of our right. But that's what we get for using Excel instead of having an actual program to run this. So back to fleet orders. We've got combat and effective, which you can declare if your fleet has just been absolutely shellacked and it's running back home to mama. And then there's a bunch of mothballs for where we're mothballing it, and potentially where we're unmothballing it, because you pay a little bit more money to mothball it when you're trying to hide the fleet, and you pay more money when you are pulling a fleet out of mothballs. So for example, mothballing in space is 0 cost, which is great, but if we now unmothballing it in space, you notice we're now paying a staggering amount more. But that's because we're literally pumping atmosphere back into it, we're fixing the seals, we're getting the thing back up and running. Anyway, for us here, we're going to go and say our fleet 1 is sitting at normal, which is great. Survey record. This entire spreadsheet here this entire screen is entirely just for your own reference. There is virtually nothing in here that actually pulls data from elsewhere, with the one exception being the target SP. This goes and looks back at Empire Overview, and this is part of your Empire creation where you can modify how many survey points you need to actually complete a survey. Default is just 0% modifier, so you'll need 200 or whatever. In this case, you can see home system, which doesn't exist, but let's say You'll notice that this is not referencing anywhere else. This is entirely its own data set, so you can plug in any kind of information you want here. Let's see, let's say we've done one survey of open through our home system, or rather, turn completed. We've completed in turn 0 technically, and we've done one pass of the open, whichever. And then we're doing any planetary surveys, etc. And there's a quick little cheat sheet that tells you how good do your sensors have to be in order to find different war points. Diplomacy inspiring. This is generally something you'll start plugging into when you start dealing with empires. Essentially, this is where any requests you've got going, who you're talking to, what your offer is, any notes you want to give the Space Master. And then the section down here is basically an open form notes for the race you've met. So it's like, say the Alliance, we've met them in. If you get the reference to why I'm saying we're meeting the Alliance in the Miranda system, good for you for reading that particular fanfic. Government type, government tendencies, EL, racial average, all these things. This is stuff that will get filled in later as you work your way through the diplomacy system and you actually start talking with them as opposed to start shooting with them. But this is entirely left alone. Leaders. This is where we plug in what leaders we have for our empire, and then this table is then referenced into a bunch of stuff later that I'll tab back to and I'll point out. So right now we've got a home admiral, a home governor, and a home general. Not terribly creative names, but that's what we have right now to start with. I don't see any reason to change it. Type of officer, admiral, governor, general. This will then determine what kind of stuff exists down here at the abilities. Location, that, so you can see the note says tie this in with something. This actually doesn't do anything by itself other than a note. So like if I typed this is like the home governor is on Kerbin, this changes nothing. If we want to actually say where the home governor is, we need to go that in planets, and we'll do that in a sec. Rank. The rank column is useful for if you want to run some kind of ranking system outside of just what their grade is. The grade, leader grade, all the way up to leader grade plus 5. It's a drop down. And then this special abilities one populates out based on these roles. So let's say our first admiral he's decisive, and let's say he's a scientist for whatever reason. So now you can see he's a decisive scientist. And lastly, down here we have the invasions tab. We can leave this almost entirely blank. This has a bunch of calculators for when you're running invasions. If you're consolidating a planet after an invasion, it handles a couple of them, as you can see here. The only thing that might be of relevance to you when you're first starting out is, if you're thinking about, running your standard I'm invading you and taking your money kind of an empire, you might want to go and build up, to have some equipment, some troops already trained up. So let's say Kerbin, 10 QT, and let's say 100 equipment. So now you can see this is what I bought, and then next turn as part of my thing, I transfer this over into here, and then that would go, and then I'd have an upkeep cost. Also conveniently up here at the top, you can see there's mega credits remaining. This little bar exists in a couple other spots, specifically like R&D and construction, so you can make sure that you haven't overspent without having to tab all the way back to the Empire overview to see what your final dollar line is looking like. The last tab is the reference tab. Please don't poke at this. This is essentially what keeps the entire thing running. So if you break something in here, then you get what you deserve. So again, leaders. Fleet orders, so you can see admirals will be available. It'll only look for admirals when you type in here. So if I type in like home, let's say home governor, yeah. You can enter them in, but be advised that this is something that the Space Master should be checking, and it would be rather awkward if you decide to assign a governor as a fleet commander. There are rules for that, and that they will suck a little bit more. They're not going to be as good as a commander. I suppose it's better than nothing, but it's worth thinking about that. R&D. So that's the initial setup, but let's get a little bit of research going. I'm going to plug in a little bit here. Let's say A, we want armor. It's a science level. We want to research science level 3 because we're special. And item cost is if you're researching the actual item, because that has a special costing on it. Governor. Do we have a governor that's helping bonuses on this? No. We are going to spend 10 research points because it costs us. We always have to spend buy the full 10 the first month, and it's the first month we're doing this research. I'll just get rid of these extra yeses. So it's the first month we're doing this, so it costs more. Down here on the far right, you can see total research points we've accrued this month, which is 10. Last month, total research points from last month, none, because this is our first, which means our odds of success are negative 32%. We're not getting that anytime soon. You can see total amount of research produced and the total cost and the target number we need to hit. Up in the top here, it's economic level. Our current EL, so you can see this is Empire Overview. This is pulling it from that Empire Overview tab, which is just off the left on the bottom there. Total amount bought this month, which is down here at 10. It copies that up over there so you can see it. Assisted, if someone else is helping you, not likely. And then what you have here is total amount last month, and then success chance, much like under projects. Economic R&D is always separate because it's critical and it's important. And it's like it deserves to be on its own. And again, you can see here also we have the total gross income or Empire, which matters for certain. If we're doing a certain item research, because that total Empire is a function of the cost. And also megacredits menu, we can see how much money we have left. Now, remember where I said that under ships designs, the Jeb and the Valentina numbers, these would matter? Well, this is where it is, because we have I can't spell Valentina. Probably because I misspelled it, but let's roll with it. So when we're leasing ships to the CFN, of course, we're making money of it. So how many ships in service are how many Jebs are in service? 10. How many Valentinas are in service? 10. So this crunches out the amount of H and QV that are available, takes the speed into account, and tells us how much revenue are we making. So we've done the basics on setup for our Empire. We've gone and given them a name here. We've made sure that their habitable world type is correct. We've made sure we plugged in our starting EL. We've gone over, we made sure that they have planets information in here. So let's say 250, Kerbal system. Let's plug this guy in. Kerbals. Let's say it has 10 IU to start, or 10 population to start. It's 0. And this is going to be let's say a barren moon. So there we go. Belt size, of course, doesn't matter for it, and it's going to be rich. So that's all it takes to enter in a planet. Systems, because it's the same system, it's all fine in there. That's really all that needs to be done. Now let's take a look at, this case, construction, and then we'll look at shipping as well and how that works. So construction is pretty straightforward. Build. Now this does not actually reference or look up anything from the ship's designs tab. That was a design idea to go and eventually have it do that. It doesn't, because this project name can be anything. You can have it for build QAs, for whatever you want to do. But right now, let's say we want to build some mainsails. So let's skip again over to ship designs. Our mainsail costs 400 mega credits. It is a destroyer, so we know it's 30 hull size because that's how big destroyers are. So how much should we say it again? Sorry, I'm just totally blind. 600. So 600 for our mainsail. Let's say quantity 2. Hull size 30. There we go. So that is our mainsail entered in. Later on, when we want to, let's say next month, if it's under construction, we put in 14 units of work done, because that's our rate. As you can see, it's up here. You'll now notice that even though we have the unit cost entered in the total quantity, now the cost is zeroed, because it knows that this is something that's under construction, and so therefore we don't have to pay again. But first month, so unfortunately, the Imperial Bean counters back home at the KSC tell us we have to pay for them. Shipping. This is a little bit more complicated, because this covers a bunch of different buttons, but it's fairly useful for what we've got here. We have the various capacity statuses, because it is possible to have more stuff that you are leasing from your own government than what exists in the base pool. And these were warnings that say that you've gotten any. These are warnings that say, are you overusing capacity, and how much, and also how much money do you have left. your maximum commercial speed, because this will actually change a little, because you can see we have speedy freighter availability. As we get the ability eventually to have faster freighters, now you can all of a sudden see that we have that if you want, you could get some base speed 5 freighters now because they exist in the market, because let's say that's the technology that's available. Right. Note, however, that, this doesn't mean that you can only get ever speed 6s. You can pay for lower, of course, right? But it does restrict you on how much you can get for the higher speeds. We've got here base pool, which is computed off of just your standard income. Extra pool, which is, leftovers. Unleashed government. This is useful because let's say you are doing a really heavy colonization push, or you're trying to invade someone, but you don't want to assign the freighters to the CFN because, well, you're going to tank your economy because you're not going to get as much money because you're just flooding the market. You can still plug them in here, and then that'll give you additional usage. Least government, this is pulled from the income summary, and then we have total capacity and now unused. Overcapacity charge is when you go the other way. Instead of flooding the market with capacity, you're instead basically just buying everything that's available, and you don't care how much it's going to cost. You will, but you don't care at that point. You don't care. PCM adjustment and into emergency. PCM, this is useful. This is done for if they are a non-player empire and they're very small, because the idea being that if they only have one large population, they're not going to have a lot of major, interstellar freighter capacity. So if we flick that on, you notice that all of a sudden the base capacity for everything drops like a stone. And it gets a little better as they get more and more planets, until I think 4 and then 5+, and 5+ it completely disappears. Into emergency is that this is when they're literally just becoming a spacefaring civ, in which case it impacts their numbers even more. This is a nice little one. Created ship base calculator. How big is something? How many H's does it take to haul it? Anyway, colonization. So let's say we're going to go from Kerbin, and we need to make sure I spell the names right because I can't. We want to go to Elu. Oops, construction. Yeah, you can see I was looking at it and I already misspelled it. EE. Okay, that's what it was. Destination citizen Kerbal. Distance and speed. So normally for CFN we'd be using speed 4. Distance, let's assume for the sake of argument that Elu is in another system, let's say 3 systems away. Transit time 1 month. PTU, we're going to ship 10. Tells us how much the emplacement cost is based on its habitability, how much H capacity is lifted, how much Q capacity is required, and then we can also set up, if we really want to be tight on the cash, did we ship the H only? Did we ship the Q only? Have we bought the actual gear for them to live? Unused pool used. So this is basically a case where you're using up freighter capacity that you haven't gotten assigned. And then dangerous systems, which dangerous system pool is used for if you're trying to go through a maze or nebula. It's more complicated. No real point in talking about that right now. CFN shipments are working the same way, where let's say Kerbin to Elu, and this is the cargo contents. So let's just say we are shipping rocket parts, but this can be this is generally used more for stuff like when you're shipping, let's say, like replacement components, where you're doing a retrofit and upgrade on a fleet that's 5 or 6 jumps away from your home system, and you've manufactured the parts at home, and now you're shipping them out to the fleet on site because you don't want to have the fleet spend 3 months coming back and forth off the front line. Distance, again, let's say 3, speed 4, which is normal, 20H required, and then the same options. There's some other options down here for in-system CFN colonization and shipping, because if you're doing something in-system, you get a couple more options. Not a real point in talking about that. So that's everything that it comes down to for actually setting up an empire and functionally running it. GM's overview tab is one I didn't talk about, and this is for when your GM is running everything, because this concatenates and shows all the research projects that are running, what they are, if they're likely to succeed, and then it's a spot for him to record if you do. Same thing for research breakthroughs, and also for completed units, construction, and so on. And that, I guess, is about it. Yeah, there you go.